Sophie. You guys have heard her name many, many times from me because basically everything I know about startup and VC I learned from her. She's also the person I spend the most time with in a week.
Me too, actually.
And well, Sophie has been in the business, in the industry of venture capital before there was even an industry in Quebec. You can learn a lot from that woman, and especially because she's a great VC, but she's also a great mentor, and I believe she's probably the best person to kind of vulgarize everything that we can learn today. And if you want to say a few words about Brightspark.
Oh, thank you. And it's reciprocal. I was so lucky to find her. I mean, she's amazing. She's the octopus at Brightspark. She does everything, which is very important, by the way. If you're going to learn a lesson, you need to be flexible and you need to be able to do everything and, you know, to adapt to your situation, because as a VC, you do many things. But Brightspark, we've been investing in tech companies for more than 15 years across Canada. We mostly focus on Canada just because we have a good network here and there's a lot of capital in the US, so it's hard for us to compete there. In Canada, there's great companies, great universities, and we can find a nice opportunity to invest in. I've been in the VC business for almost 25 years. We also are very entrepreneurial at Brightspark, so we started companies ourselves also. And a few years ago, my partner and I decided to innovate on our own model, because the VC model has been very static for the last, I would say, 40 years. It's always been like raising a big fund, building a portfolio of companies, and then there's been a bit of innovation in, you know, AngelList and various groups around the world. So we decided to innovate and capitalize on a huge opportunity where, and you're in the wealth management, so you're going to understand that, where wealthy individual or smaller institution really want to be exposed to venture capital investments, because especially nowadays, a lot of the return in the market has been created in private companies. And if you cannot participate in that, it's really hard to create a blended return that is interesting just with the public market or the fixed asset or whatever. So we're creating a model where a lot wealthy individual participate through our model. So we've created kind of a product with the VC investment model, and we've been doing that for 2.5 years, and that's when Eleanor joined to help us build that.
And I'll introduce Fred. So Fred is kind of a serial entrepreneur. So before starting Hopper 10 years ago yesterday, I found out.
Last week.
Last week. So he actually created his own startup, co-founded a startup called NewTrade, which then raised about $7 million, and in 2002 got acquired by Expedia, at which point Fred got the very lucky opportunity of kind of choosing a VP to go under, and was part of some major acquisitions over on their team. And then for the past 10 years, Fred has been working at building Hopper, and I joined the team a year ago now. And it's just been a great ride, and I was asked to make it a fun introduction. So Fred actually hates traveling, loves surfing and snowboarding, and summers in Maine.
That's true.
So Fred, do you want to introduce Hopper?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you guys have the app, right? If you don't, you can leave. So you know what we do. We use a lot of data to bring clarity to what is a convoluted consumer problem, which is all about flights. When do I buy it? What do I do? We started with a broader problem in mind. We had a very interesting pivot. We are known for taking our time to launch. I think it was 6.5 years. People were throwing rocks at me at the end, right? But when we launch, we make sure we go big. If you look at the company's history, it was started up here in Montreal. My co-founder, Joost Urquhart, is actually from Montreal. He now lives in Boston. We have a pretty big Boston office. It's maybe a little bigger than here in terms of square footage. We have people in Toronto, Moncton, Chile.
Moncton is new.
Yeah, Moncton. It's been there for a while, actually. New York now. So we have people spread out all over the place. Raised $104 million to date. We're doing about $1 million a day in sales, maybe a little bit more. We have people buying on the app in about 130 countries. So most of that growth was in the last 18 months. Almost everybody died during that period. We're more of a growth company now than a proper startup, meaning the challenges are very different. And Sophie was the first investor. The company was started in her office, actually, in the old port.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in with the first question of how did you guys meet? Like, did you know each other before the first pitch, or it was really like a traditional?
Shockingly, we did not. Sophie was probably the only VC I hadn't pitched in town. And I was talking to my tax advisor for some retarded reason, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I hear you're starting something again. I know a couple of good firms." One was Rowe.
Which, by the way, are closing their doors.
Yeah, not surprised. The other one was you. And
Remove that from the video.
Yeah. I didn't say anything.
I forgot.
You set that up yourself.
No, it's because I
Like
learned.
minute 3, you're already in trouble.
I learned that last week. That's why.
Yeah, so I said, fuck that, I'm never raising money in Canada again. It's just not going to happen. I'm going to raise from the US, and that's that. And he says, no, go meet these guys. And he basically introduced me to Sophie, and then they invited me up to Toronto after that. So we'd never met. I knew who you were because of the Caisse de dépôt.
Well, I knew who he was because at New Trade he had a board member that was also on the board of one of my company that I had in travel, same space. That was really shitty company, but anyway. And he used to tell me all the time, have you heard of this company, New Trade? It's so exciting, and so on and so forth. Then he raised money with another institution in Quebec, and we never got to connect it, but I had heard
you
about
sued us. You sent me a cease and desist for hiring your people.
Oh yeah, it's true. It's true. It's true.
Yes.
And he was on both boards.
Yes.
Because he was hiring the people from my bad company that wanted to leave anyway because they were not happy. And yeah. Yeah, so he came to pitch to our office, and he was just like full of energy, a PowerPoint, and a vision on how the travel industry were the next big category that was to be disrupted, because really it was the biggest first category online, and the logic was to say it's so inefficient and so on and so forth, we're going to build this thing, and he had all the experience from Expedia. And I remember listening and thinking, wow, I mean, the energy and the knowledge of the space and the way he was presenting was amazing. But I wasn't sure about the idea per se that he was bringing, but really, really fell in love with the energy and everything. And then he met my two partners, and it was, we talked for like 5 minutes together, the 3 partners at Brightspark, and we said, wow, we love this guy, he's an amazing entrepreneur, we're not sure about the idea, but who cares? And then we called him back.
Yeah, so you guys did something that, I think it's the second most insane thing that a VC's ever done. The first would be Jeff Fagnan when he entered, but so I go up to Toronto, and usually you're going to meet, especially Canadian VCs, you're going to meet them 3 times before they forget to call you back to tell you they're not investing. That's the usual process. In this case, they made me go down to Toronto after we met in Montreal, and then we went through the conversation, and then Mark, I think, said, "Can you give us 5 minutes, go wait in the hall, and then we'll tell you." And I remember I said, "You'll tell me what?" And Mark said, "We'll tell you if you're going to invest." And I said, "In what?" And he says, just get out of the room. And then you guys came back, and then you said, "We'll give you $2 million." And then I didn't take it, if you remember. I said, "No, I'm not taking $2 million." But the fact that you guys took a decision on the spot, which is the only logical thing to do. Either you meet everybody, and you meet the entrepreneur, either you're going to do it or not, but most funds don't work that way. They'll fuck around on all sorts of irrelevant things. That today is a story I still tell. When anybody calls me up for a reference, I say, this is the only VC that I've ever met, and I've probably pitched 100 by now, that said, leave the room, come back in 5 minutes, we'll give you a yes or no answer, which even the Valley guys don't do.
I think that's really interesting because for us, we'll be investing with people that have nothing. Basically, we're going to do 25K checks. And we have to move fast because the goal is really to get the money so that entrepreneurs can go run with it and build their thing. Do you have any advice on what are the little tips or little red flags or green lights about meeting entrepreneurs that have really nothing to show up for yet, but that you can kind of tell just by the personality or the way they act during meetings and everything?
Well, I think, like Fred said, for us, we made a decision quick. And if I look back at all the deals we've made, in most cases, right away. Like you meet the people, and in our case, I guess it's experience, which is going to be maybe hard to replicate for you guys, but there's also instinct. So you meet someone, and if when they talk about their business, if they're passionate about it, if they know what they're talking about, if they have the right reflex, and so on and so forth. So having been an investor for such a long time, there's a lot of stuff that you can see when you talk to them. Sometimes they're a bit off, they get all mixed up in what they tell you. Sometimes an entrepreneur will not be confident and certain about everything they tell you because they don't know, they're trying to figure it out. But at least you can know there's knowledge and they've thought through it, and they're not like telling you bullshit and stuff they haven't figured out before. So a lot of it is instinct. Yeah.
What did you talk about in 5 minutes? What were kind of like the points that were discussed?
In the first five
When I
minutes.
was out of the room,
Yeah.
he's asking what you guys talked about, which is an
Yeah.
interesting question.
Oh, we just said, wow, he's an amazing entrepreneur. How can we do this deal? Should we go in with a big amount, small amount? And then we've talked about, because his first idea, actually, we didn't like, but we liked him. But at Bright Spark, we always invest in people, because I've been doing this for a long time. You make money with people, and 90%, if not more, of the equation is about the people driving the idea, because the idea will change, evolve, and will become something else. And amazing management can, invest in something that doesn't work out. They'll figure out a way to navigate to something better, and you'll still be okay. Average management will pitch you something. If it doesn't work, it's just gonna fail, right? So when you find those people so it's about somebody that will persevere, somebody that has a very high level of energy, obviously is quite important. And then this kind of, I call it sometimes the bulldozer. We have a few in our portfolio. Another one that he knows well that I refer to, Tony, is the same. Very similar to Fred in a different way, but kind of a bulldozer where you'll know they'll never stop. Like they'll just go and get to where they want. But that's what we've talked about, that 5 minutes.
I mean, if you're asking how you pick good investments, it's actually the same skill set as when we hire into a company. And it's actually a pretty important thing. Honestly, a lot of people at Hopper, like, we grew a lot. There's like almost 70 of us now, and so I've been having to train people on how to hire. It's actually the most important thing to build a culture in a company. It's the same thing these guys are doing when they're picking their companies. And so normally, you can go through Stephanie, who's I've been torturing on the hiring, and Dakota was, when he was walking in that room, he was doing screens. So we do a ton of them, and we don't have recruiters, and for all the same reasons why they don't outsource the companies that they're going to invest in, right? But at the end of the day, you usually know within 2 minutes. Like if you've done enough of them within 60, 120 seconds. One of the things that we like to do a lot though, which might actually apply to what you guys are doing, is we call this calibration. So we actually did this on you, I think, when Stephanie was doing that. So we take somebody that we know is awesome, and when we're opening a new function or a new interview or a new job role, sometimes it's somebody in the company, and we make them answer the questions of an interviewer. And the reason is this, is if you think of like a bell curve, right? The way that anything distributes in statistically, but also in humanity, what most companies do and what most bad investors do is they say, these people are terrible, right? Like, we're not going to invest in them. You can train a small monkey to do that, right? You don't need to be a VC. And then you go to the top, there's like the 2% best, absolute, smartest, most aggressive people, and then you have a whole spectrum of good people. Most companies, they may move past the 50% mark. They say, if somebody's good, they're going to show up, good job, we're going to hire them. We don't do that. If you're good in the interview, we just won't hire you. So we pass on good people all day. We have about 3,000 people a month applying to work here, and we maybe put out 4 offers a month. What we only hire is the 2%. And what these guys are doing is exactly that, because at the end of the day, most of their investments are not going to work out. So they're looking to get these 2%ers that are going to return 10x. And the truth is, somebody who's in that 2% of whatever.
What are you saying, 10x?
Yeah, you're right. It's a good point, right? It's like 100x, a million x. But
I hope we're past that.
Yeah, the people that are here in a normal environment, they're going to perform adequately. They're not bad, but they're not these in this 2% bucket. But the thing about the startup, which is totally different, is how the odds stack up. So there's about, let's say that there's 15 people in this room right now. Is my count about right? So stand up. Yeah. What's your name again? Terrence, okay. So the normal cycle for a startup is about 7 years. people think you make money in 2 years, and all. It's actually 7 years. It's more like 9 now, actually. We're actually, with our freaking 10-year anniversary, we're actually not that much off of the bell curve. So it's actually 7 years. So let's say all of you started a company, including the girl that's running the camera and everything right now, a startup, and you put in a full 7 years of work. You're working 60 hours. She gives you $2 million. You raise venture money and all that. By the way, the minute she invests, your odds of exiting have gone down. By the way, when you take venture money, the odds that you're going to exit are actually lower for a bunch of reasons. Everybody does this. It's now 2025, 7 years later, if my math is right. He gets millions of dollars. Do you know what the rest of you get? Fuck all. You lost 7 years of your life. So you can sit down now. You just made
But
several
you've
million
made
dollars.
a lot of millions of dollars.
So the point is, because the odds are so deeply stacked against you, normal behavior will not create an extraordinary outcome, nor will choosing normal people in that outcome. So you're actually better off lacing your portfolio with complete lunatics and brilliant people, right? Which is a lot of what you guys ended up doing.
So we said in the meeting,
Yes.
he's a complete lunatic.
Yes. But if you don't go for the outliers in what you're choosing, because the average outcome is utter complete failure, you make no money. In the best world, she'll return her money, but in most cases, they'll learn. You can't have a normal approach. And that's a completely sociopathic behavior, right? You're never in a situation like that in life. Professional sports, elite military units, venture capital, there's very few things that have to skew that way. So you're actually looking for people that have outlier personalities, but more importantly, outlier abilities. And it's actually the combination of those two things that's really hard to find. It's the same thing when you're building your startup, by the way. Your first 10 hires, and really your first 100 hires should be this, but your first 10 hires should have to be in the 2%, otherwise it's going to fall apart.
Totally agree.
So Fred, kind of going off this whole idea that VC money sometimes actually makes you worse off.
Statistically
Yeah.
speaking, it makes you worse off all the time.
So like of all money, like why did you choose to partner up with Brightspark? And kind of often said in VC circles is that the first investor matters the most. So why do you look, like what do you look for in a VC, especially for early rounds or even that Series A and B, C?
It's the same criteria that they use to choose us. So once you exit once, you actually are in a much better situation. You should be able to raise again, even with a terrible idea. But at the end of the day, you're looking for the same outlier behavior that they're looking in you, right? So you should have the same criteria. There's a whole bunch of things that go into like deciding whose money you take when you're lucky enough to be able to decide, right? But that you actually make your own fate a lot in that process. But what I always optimize for is I try to imagine the worst freaking week. The company's about to run out of money. Nothing worked. I fucked everything up. We call a board meeting. This is how I've made every single decision I've ever made, is like, do I want that person sitting across the table on that day? And if the answer is I'm not sure, I don't take the money. And if the answer is absolutely yes, this is the right person, when everything's going to be screwed up. And I think in year 2, I tried to return the money. And I actually think I offered to pay you what we spent back out of my own bank account, because it was so bad that you want to optimize for that. Because although what you hear about all the time is these Bill Gates and Zuckerberg rise to fame, Airbnb, the vast majority of startups that work, which is the 10% that actually get something out of it, will not have a linear ride. It's going to go very flat, very bad, down. A friend of mine says, you always plan for the absolute worst thing, like when you're managing your cash and figuring it out, and it turns out so much worse than what you planned, but somehow you make it through, right? This is a guy that's on his 3rd company, right? And that's what happens almost all the time. And actually the rocket ship rises, most of them end up like Groupon, not like Facebook. Right, so even the ones that like have a tear from like foundation, Groupon's actually a pivot. They were a social. They were basically Kickstarter, too early. then they pivoted that, and then they became Groupon, and they stole all the money, and it all crashed. But like most things that
Stole all the money.
yeah, they wrote themselves $400 million checks, and then they left. But the point is that even the things that take off usually end up crashing. Very few of them actually hit like the Airbnb and the Facebook kind of stages. So you're actually optimizing for the Batham Death March when you're in the desert and like nothing's going your way. Because the good entrepreneurs don't give up. That's the other quality. So you don't want VCs that are going to give up on you because they own a chunk of your company at that point.
Yeah. So what would you say is like a red flag for a founder, like when talking to VCs?
That's a good question. There's so many things VCs don't do well. So the single most important thing is that they're buying into you and not your idea. Right? If they're buying into your idea, you're basically fucked because you're selling them something you're probably not going to deliver. And then they're going to panic. So you want to see that. You want to have a sense that they're smarter than you at least one thing you need to be good at. Right? That they have something to contribute. And I'm actually saying this for the early stage. The later stage guys, it's very different. You want to make sure their pockets are deep, that they're going to keep a cool head, that they can do secondary. You have a whole other set of stuff. But if you're talking about, seed A and maybe B, depending on what you're doing, it's basically the opposite equation of when they're investing in you, right? So you want them to make sure they're buying into you and not the idea, because chances are you're going to have to pivot. You want to make sure they're better at you than something, that they're going to bring something to the table. You want to make sure there's no ego. The ego's out of the way. That's toxic. It's the same thing for the founder. All these founders are like these self-branded guys, prima donnas that go on TV. All that shit is like, it's toxic. Most VCs are like that. There's a ton of these guys. If the fund is big, all they're doing is they're living off of the 2% management fees. Some of these guys have never made money in their life. Actually, she's one of the few that has made money in Canada, like straight up. Venture capital from inception is negative 6% return from the first day. That actually venture capital as a category hasn't made money in Canada yet. And in the US, if you pull out Stanford and the MIT in a 50-mile radius and you look at what's left, that's negative too. It's like a fallacy that VCs make money. A whole bunch of VCs just spend money on expensive cars and yachts. So you want to make sure these guys have actually done something.
I don't have a yacht.
I prefer people that are operators. That could have been, should have been. Her partners were founders. Tony Davis. Interestingly, I invested in the companies that Tony Davis starts. I'm actually an investor in their companies as an angel investor. Jeff Fagnan in Boston never operated, but he basically was going to be an operator, and then something happened, and he accidentally became a VC. So you're actually looking for people that aren't venture capitalists, that are entrepreneurs that happen to not have become an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist.
I think just to add to that, sometimes bigger firms, you have a venture capitalist that will invest in your company, but he might not stay there. So that's a big red flag. So you have to make sure the deal that you're making, the person you're making the deal with, will remain. And we had that experience at Hopper where we had a big fund investing and there was rotation. So we had a new board member every year. That can be really disrupting, and you need to think about it. So is the person investing a decision maker, and are they going to stick around?
That's a good one.
I'll go first. Okay. Do you always fully trust each other between the founder and the VC?
The minute you don't, you're dead. It's over. The minute you don't. I keep talking about Jeff because he's actually, they do exactly what Sophie does, but out of Boston. When I got references from him, one of the founders said, it's a guy that's actually, he's a pretty big entrepreneur in the Valley. He said, hey, I had this thing where Jeff had put some money in, and I had misread the shareholder agreement, and we got an offer to sell. And I thought that blah, 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 pref, blah, 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 whatever, meant that I was going to make this amount of money. And legally, the document said that Jeff was right. And Jeff went to this guy and said, you really understood it that way? He says, here's why. He's like, that's completely wrong, but we're going to execute the deal like what you understood, not what is written in the legal paper. There's maybe 3 VCs in the world that would do that, right? So the minute trust is gone, that everybody's going to do the right thing, especially if you're successful and you're adding more people to your board, the core that started the company and the core of people that invested that own a disproportionate share of your cap table at that point because they paid a lot less than the last guys did. If that trust is over, it just won't work. If anybody ever invokes any, what does the shareholder agreement say to forcing a vote? Or the minute that comes up once, you just
Kill the
run,
company.
run. Like if you work at that company, quit. If you invest, sell. If you're the CEO, like just get everybody out.
And we invest in people. So for us, particularly, not all VCs are like that. It's like so important. Like we have 100%. Even when Hopper, there was difficult times and they changed and so on and so forth. We always had 100% trust. Like we knew, and I remember even us having partners discussion where we said, "Oh, it's taking quite a long time," But we would all say, "But we really trust that Fred is doing everything he should be doing." Like it's not because he was making wrong decisions. It's not because he was, not hiring the right people or spending the money in the wrong way or whatever. There was never. It was always like, "Yeah, it's just the process." The process of building a startup can be in some cases long, and it's like this, you're pregnant for a long time, but we understood that's what was happening. There was no trust issue. And I totally agree that, unfortunately, not all of my companies turned out to be positive like Hopper and others. And in every scenario where we start doubting that the founders or the CEO were doing the right thing, in all cases we lost our money. Because we invest, usually the founder that we invest in, we have to believe will be able to bring the company to the exit. I mean, in the rare cases where the company, grows to do an IPO and whatever, there's cases where you need somebody maybe to take over. And even in that scenario, you have to think that that person can bring the company to the end. Right.
In your previous answers, you talked about second time founder, third time experience also as an investor. Do you believe that first time entrepreneurs can be good founders?
No, every successful entrepreneur was a first time entrepreneur at some point, right? Like, yeah, dude, I raised my first round when I was 22. Like, I quit school when I was 19, so I got a whole bunch of time to screw around.
You should all quit school.
Yeah.
Not.
I don't recommend that. When it comes down to, it's one of two things: sheer stupid fucking blind luck in a very small number. Like the two YouTube founders, right? Like you can even tell me their names, right? Like they would just right place, right time, right? So sometimes that happens, right? Like, and there's a lot of smaller examples in that. Like I met some guys, I'm like, how can you make so much money? You can't even tie your shoes. So there's
there's people that are lucky constantly.
Sure. There's also a lot of one-hit wonders that put out one good single, right? Like so that happens in startups too. Like there's no.
But that's as a VC, you want the guy who's lucky every 2 years. That's
But most of the people that are successful, they have a whole bunch of qualities that cross around everything. First of all, the kind of people that won't give up. So when I had him standing up, and you do this to a bigger room, people that want to be entrepreneurs, you can kind of divide humanity off of like one way, which is most people are going to go, wow, those odds are fucking terrible. There's only one dude standing up and in 7 years and we get nothing. Then there's always a couple people that go, that's going to be me, right? So the first thing, if a founder isn't wired like that, it's not going to work, right? It's just too hard, right? Those people give up. The second thing is there is an overwhelming number of people that aspire to be him, but just can't do it. And, I could train all I want. I'm never, ever going to be a professional basketball player. Right? It just doesn't matter how hard I fight, right? And there's a whole lot of things that I can't do like that. This isn't any different, right? You get millions of dollars, right? At the end, it's like you're not going to get that by asking for it. You're gonna have to, and everybody's competing against you and all this money, and right? Like you watch these gangster movies and they're killing each other for $6 million, and right? It's like some people make that like in an hour, right? Like selling their startup. So there's so much money and so much upside in this. Of course, it's the hardest thing in the world, right? So. Although a lot of people aspire to be him, most people don't have the talent, right? So first of all, the predisposition to self-inflict so much pain, on yourself. There's a lot of other ways to make money, right? Like I can give you a list of easier ways to make money. But if you have the desire to do it, then you need to have the capability. And that is a lot of things. First of all, every guy that I've known that's a successful CEO, a startup CEO, from Rich Barton, the guy that basically trained me, to all these other guys, they're in the 1% smart. Just define that whatever you want, like you speak to them for 5 minutes and that's that. Second, they have some form of charisma that sometimes is magnetic, sometimes it's the opposite of that. They will get the fucking deal closed no matter what it takes, right? These people are Glenn Glary, Glenn Ross, ABC Coffees for Closers. There's not a single CEO I know that doesn't close, right? So that's a second thing. That's a different skill set. Some of them are terrible people managers. Some of them are great, but people follow them, even the terrible ones. I worked for a guy that made people cry all day, but people did what, they just wanted to like live up to this guy's potential. Other people, Rich Barton's one of them, you get in a room for 10 minutes and then you're like hypnotized, you're gonna do whatever he says. Like, some people are so magnetic. Steve Jobs was like that. That's also part of it. Good judgment is another thing, which is something we screen for a lot at Hopper. So you'll notice there's a lot of people that are energetic, they're reasonably smart, they'll always do the fucking worst thing. Like A, B, they go to B. It's like, why? Like, why? What? A banana? Why would you? What does that have to do with anything? There's tons of people like that. Somehow you're gonna meet 1,000 little decisions like that in your seven, and you're always gonna have to go with not enough information and pick the thing that's the right thing. The startup founders are makers, right? Like, I don't care what it is. Like, you're always hustling some side deal for some show. You made your own like robot, like out of Legos. You cook kombucha. Like, everybody that I know that's good is continuously making something. If you're not a maker, you don't belong in the startup world, because that's what it is. It's taking nothing and making something that's worth billions of dollars from nothing. Like, in the beginning, there's actually nothing. There's you in a room, right? So if you're not a maker continuously doing that, there's something broken. You shouldn't work in a startup. You shouldn't actually certainly start one. So that's another criteria. Most good founders, all of them actually are analytical. They're quant. Even when they're not, they can't. Half the decision is this weird instinct. The other half is they actually look at the consequences of spending money, like they run numbers all the time with different degrees of sophistication, but they're able to materialize their actions into some measurable thing without knowing what a KPI is. They just do this instinctively. They'll boot up the worst freaking spreadsheets you've ever seen. And the last thing is you have to be able to deal with complexity. Some people, when they're presented with complexity, it weighs on them. You can feel they get confused and stressed out. Other people, their brains just naturally spin up these very complicated trees, and they're able to pivot them. Which
And
is
they
also
love
something
it. They feed on it.
They feed on complexity. So apart from the resilience to chaos and all that other stuff, if those traits are rare. Like, you can take 1,000 people and you might find one that has them, and that's actually the outcome of people building successful startups. And the reality is, people think it's cool. It's like, I'm a published writer, I'm a rock star, I'm a startup CEO. I don't know why that thing has that. It's actually not cool, but like, because of all this stuff about the entrepreneur is like, ooh, the founder of the economy or whatever, the people aspire to it. So there's a lot of people that are attracted to this category, and because you don't get cut from college because you suck at football, a lot of people get to play, right? They'll raise $50,000, $2 million, and they suck. They just don't have enough of these qualities pent up. The one thing that you do see, though, is when a startup gets bigger and they attract good people and the management's good, the people that spin out of that because they were selected for their qualities, they're usually very good because they've actually seen the growth. So the only place you can actually learn, if you have these raw skills, learn how to execute it properly, is in a startup that's well managed and that's growing. That's why you see concentrations, Silicon Valley is HP and then it's spun out. Microsoft, like, there's nothing in fucking Seattle except Microsoft and Boeing, right? So the only reason there's activity there is because of Microsoft attracted all these people. So that's why these campuses build that. And we had this at Corel in the 80s, and it actually kind of spun up part of the Microsoft campus in Ottawa and all that. So the place where you make startup entrepreneurs is in these companies that have gotten big enough that there's a couple thousand people working in them. But those qualities are, you have a better chance of finding a Navy SEAL, like in my direct estimation, because it's, you need to run and shoot people. It's a little bit easier than what we do.
We don't typically invest in first time, so that's the other side of the coin. Just because as a VC, we try to replicate what has worked for us. And we've made money would repeat. And I think the reason is a little bit what Fred was explaining. We don't do a lot of deals. We select our companies. We're very picky, and we look for founders that excite us and everything. And there's so much volume on the first-time entrepreneurs. It's kind of hard to pick the right one and so on. Once they do it a second time, the selection is already made for us, so it reduces the risk. But there is investors that do a lot of first time. In Montreal, there's Real Ventures, and there's a lot of incubators and so on and so forth. And it's a great way to start. A lot of VC will stay away from it, but some do also. It depends on the philosophy. But we've preferred where we've made a lot of money. And Fred is one, and we had a company in the Maritimes. Marcel Lebrun was his second company. Michel Cooley was his third company. A lot of the Tony, which is one of our CEO also, it's his fourth company. And for us, it's a question of we call it making new mistakes and not old mistakes. First-time entrepreneurs, even if you're really smart, you've got all the qualities that Fred would, and it's rare that you've got all the qualities, so sometimes there's a few missing. And you tend, as a first-time entrepreneur, make basic mistakes that will cost a lot of time and money, and will bring you in the wrong direction. And sometimes it takes too long to direct the course, and it just can cost you the company. So for us, we usually invest in second times, but there is great ways to get that first-time experience to get to the next step.
In an ecosystem that's deeper than Montreal or Boston or a San Francisco, the lead VCs will look either for things that have already proven they can work, where there's traction, or they'll look for people that were part of teams that actually made it, for exactly the reasons she said, because they'll have been present on all the screw-ups, and they'll work with somebody that kind of trained them mentally to avoid the really tough stuff. It's a hard job to learn. In the US, they say that for a venture capitalist to become good and be able to create returns for a fund, they need to blow $50 million. And it's the same thing for an entrepreneur, because if you're blowing somebody else's money, well, the VCs, it's not your money either. That
in our
process,
case, it's kind of is now.
It kind of is now, yeah. But the reality is you need to make a lot of mistakes. So if you're looking at it as an investment decision, you want to have people that have gone through basic training, right? And that's why that's the case. But there's no such thing as a second-time entrepreneur that didn't start once, right? Like it's
Yeah, for sure. And I think the other piece is one thing that we'll never do, and we've done it once and it was a disaster, is we'll never invest in a startup led by somebody that has never been in a startup. So you could be a first time, and but somebody that used to work at a big company as this and then starts a startup doesn't work, because the culture for us is a big factor in making sure you're building your startup the right way. And the culture is about who you're going to hire, how you're going to train your people, what's going to be the core value of your employees, and so on and so forth. And it's so critical to your success. Like in the beginning, your first few employees will probably dream about your company and think about it all the time. I'm sure Dakota still dreams about Hopper every night.
Most of them are
when he
nightmares.
sleeps. But that's what makes it amazing, because you can squeeze so much out of so few people because their contribution is immense. When you're in a big company, compared to a startup, you basically work 2 hours a week, because all of the rest is waste. It's meetings and it's process and it's admin and it's stuff that is absolutely worth nothing. In a startup, every minute makes a huge difference, and so you want your employees to just dream about it, think about it, and contribute all the time. So we'll never invest in somebody that doesn't have that culture, and it's way too risky to invest in somebody who's never been in a startup. That's been our experience, and
most good funds think that way.
yeah, we could be proven wrong, but
I do think, speaking about employees and building the team, from both your perspective, how can a VC help and not help in helping founders building their team, or just getting to the first milestone? At Bryce Park, Sophie, you mostly said that the good entrepreneurs, the boards are really boring because they know what to do, and and you don't have to teach them about how to run their business. They should know. But how can you help? And I think hiring can be something of helping finding the good people. So what would be your advice on how to help entrepreneurs after an early stage investment?
I'll let you jump in on the help, but I know VCs vary in their opinion on that widely, but from my experience, I believe we're just there when they need, right? So most of our CEOs and the companies we've invested in, if they need our help, they're gonna ask for it. And in most cases, we invested people that are really strong and they know what they're doing. So I'm not gonna tell them, oh, you should be hiring a VP sales and I'm gonna introduce you some. See, so we've got experience. We've been investing in startups for years. We've done companies ourselves. So a lot of the CEOs will call us to bounce ideas, to say, you know what, I'm thinking I've got an issue with that. I think I'm gonna do that. What do you think? We're gonna give our opinion and then they do whatever they want. We're not telling them what to do. We're just there because when you're the CEO of a startup, it can be really lonely. And I know there was many times that Fred wanted to jump off a bridge, well, in the first 5 years. So I was kind of there to say, you don't need to jump off a bridge. It's okay. We know you're doing the right thing. It's very discouraging, you know? So we're just there when they need. When Hopper raised a big round of financing lately, well, there was things that was helpful for us to contribute because we've done it so many times. But a startup usually raises a big round like that every 2 years, sometimes only once in their life. So the experience is not there. I mean, for us, it's very easy. We do it all the time, so we'll help. But if they don't need the help, no need.
It is pointless for a VC to try to help a startup, especially like if they're trying to help with recruiting or blah and best practice. It's all crap at the end of the day. Because first of all, that means you invested in somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. You should have all the basics down. That's number one. The recruiting, it's not true that they can really help because you should have your shit together. Like you shouldn't need your investor to like, it's like calling your mom to wash your clothes. Like you should be able to hire good people. This is why you're doing this, right? So that's one thing. There's a few things that are actually very useful. So when it comes to fundraising, especially in bigger ecosystems like the US, you're gonna want one of the guys that is already in your company to call all of his buddies and say, you gotta meet this guy. Right? And so there's that networking effect. So Accomplice in Boston has a partner, Ryan. He crushed me under tier 1 fund interest. Like I had 100 of these guys and in 2 fucking days. It was ridiculous. I called them and I said, stop introing me to awesome funds because I can't even keep up with your email. So that is an important part. If you're an early stage, that you're able to create the conveyor belt. Because these later stage guys, they see so much junk that they need somebody to tell them, look at this, right? So that's important. The main value that a venture capitalist adds to the board, in my opinion, is they're not in the day-to-day. So they've seen a lot of comparables and they haven't drunken your stupid internal kumbaya Kool-Aid. So you come up with what you want to do and they're one step removed from it. Obviously they believe in it, but they haven't heard all the junk about the international points of sale, the blah, blah, blah. So they're going like, why are you doing this, right? Like a good VC is going to ask a lot of why and what's your reasoning. And internally we try to do that. Like now at our scale, I try to stay one step removed from everything so I can come in with very little context and say, why are you doing this? And people are like, oh, fuck. Like, we've been thinking about this for a month and nobody asked that one question. That's what distance does, right? So often you want your VCs just to listen to all your crap and not be involved in the making of the sausage to say, well, you know, chocolate sausage, are you sure? That's not a good idea. Like, who wants to eat that, right? It's that kind of 1% stuff that you miss that often, you know, has you sinking in, you know, $10 million in a bad idea. Calming you the fuck down. There's going to be a point where you're losing your, like, I was threatening to go to, you know, McLean's and give an interview on how bad one of our investors when I was screaming on the street. This was like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I was with my cell phone in front of the grocery store yelling into it and she was on the other end. She's like, Fred, calm down. Don't, like you still need these guys. So like stuff happens where at some point, even if I'm reasonably level-headed, but you're gonna just lose your crap. You've done it for other like people that at some point you need somebody to say, hey, like calm down, don't burn all your bridges. That's kind of useful. And nobody in your company is gonna do that, right? If you're, you know, usually these things you can't tell anybody in the company, but also when there's a new round that's raised, there's this weird thing where the people that have already invested, they're now negotiating
Against you.
Against the new investor. Like their interest is more locked in with yours. When she's investing the first time, we're negotiating against each other. Because every share that I give to her, I don't keep, right? You guys understand how that works, right? So, but once she's in and she wants to invest, especially early stage, we're more aligned in keeping as much equity in that common pool because the new money dilutes both of us. So we're negotiating. So it's good to have an experienced VC on your side and that stuff kind of helping you navigate that part. That's good. when somebody wants to buy you, you're going to need people that have sold companies before, whether you're going to accept that offer or not. So that, whatever 1 month period where you're deciding if you're going to, sell your company or not, and it's all weird. You're invested in it, it's your baby, all that crap. VCs they have a portfolio of these. They're like, yeah, I'll sell your company. Like, you start another one. So often that gives you a different perspective on the thing that you can't ask your mom about that, right? Like, nobody's going to help you there. You can't go to your friends and say, should I sell my company? And say, I don't know, like. So that part of it is actually super useful. But outside of that cycle, maybe sometimes it's like a reference, but you shouldn't be talking to your investors that much. Like, really, you should be sending them an update email.
And I think from that perspective is alignment of interest. So if you are completely aligned with your investors and your VCs, then everything that Fred says works, because every time you raise money, you're on the same side. And so this is why when we invest in a company, we always say, once you've negotiated the terms and you've done the deal, you're in the same boat and you're all rowing in the same direction. But sometimes it's not the case for various reasons, and you've got investors that are misaligned, then it creates problem. But if you keep the alignment, then you're all going in the same direction and you seek the help from your VC where you need it. But the VC doesn't have an ego to say, oh, I've been the one to tell him that or whatever. I used to have a company that was very successful, growing and everything, and we had one VC on that company that had a really big ego. And I remember this company was doing amazing, leading their market, beating all the projections. The management was paying themselves a very low salary. They were not frugal. They were like just amazing culture to build this company. And then the CEO would come to the board and say, okay, let's review compensation package for the management, so how we're paid and bonuses and everything. And I was like, well, what do you recommend? The CEO, so he says, well, I think we should pay bonuses that were planned because we exceeded all of our targets by 100%. So I was like, oh, okay, agreed, go. But the other that had a big, oh no, let's do a special meeting separately, discuss the best practices in the industry, review. And then we had like an hour meeting to discuss, and at the end we approved the thing. But what's the point? It's like obvious. They've met all the objectives, they're amazing, they're driving. I don't need to have an ego to say, oh, I've done this meeting where I'm making the decision and we're gonna go through all, so some VCs will go through that, which is not necessarily healthy for CEOs, but if your interests are aligned, you should help where you need.
Yeah, you both talked about how experience is important on both sides. So you want to invest, you don't invest the first time, and as a startup, you want VC that has experience to invest in. But we are students, we don't necessarily have. Some people have experience, but not all of us, and we will surely invest in first time. They are students also. So what do you think of that? If you have any advice?
But your mission is different. I think from what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I think it's amazing, by the way, what Front Row Venture is doing. It's great for the ecosystem in Canada and Montreal for sure, but you want to encourage students to think about entrepreneurship and to think about the startup ecosystem, to get involved and to try stuff, right? So it's very different. You're not saying, I'm going to give you $2 million and you're going to run with that money. So to me, it's more an alternative to giving them some kind of a grant that they could get to start a company and move on. So I see it very differently. I see it more as education and opportunities to get involved into something. So if experience is the thing that is the most important, it's a great way for them to gain experience. So they should do that, but they should at the same time make sure that they're exposed to people that have done it before. They work with experienced people so they can learn and not start their young career as an entrepreneur with no feedback and nobody to bounce what they're doing against, right?
I think what you're trying to do, regardless of the outcome of juicing up the access to this, you're trying to learn how to pick people that have a certain set of qualities, right? you win or lose, whether you take equity or not, they make money, this is for real, if it's play money, you're looking for people that have a certain set of qualities. That's why I'm equating it to how we hire. So what I would do if I was you is I would gather up a bunch of ideas, and then just figure out what a great person would do with that idea, right? So come to somebody who's a good entrepreneur and say, hey, if you were starting so-and-so problem in so-and-so thing, what would you do with it? They say, well, that's fucking stupid, I'd never do that. Why, right? So it's not that I think something is stupid, it's my thought process, right? And if you see that kind of, the energy, the analytical, the way the instincts work, jumping immediately to the execution, but keeping an idea of the big picture, being able to, communicate the idea in a way, just same thing that when we're hiring. If you find that in somebody, then you should back them. It doesn't matter what they want to do, because first of all, that person's probably going to have a better outcome than the average, but B, that person is probably a more interesting candidate to become an entrepreneur. So I would look at I would take the ideas that are presented to you and pitch it to people that are good entrepreneurs and say, how do you think about this idea? Which is what we do when we interview. We're like, okay, tell me about something you know, and then biomolecular, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, and we're looking for these traits. I know nothing about what the person is talking about, but I'm looking for the same traits that we see in the people here. You're trying to create a culture. You're looking for people that are cultural fit to the tribe of entrepreneurs. It's being good at detecting that I think is going to be interesting, not the return. I mean, you're going to lose all the money, right? Like the chances that you're actually going to return something is very low. So go for the experience, right? So try to figure out what makes somebody look good. And the other thing too that happens in these relationships, a lot of people are going to be at the apex of how awesome you think they are the first meeting. And it's all downhill after that, right? So there are people that are very good at selling themselves, they have a good facade. You have to be really, really good at digging behind that. What you want is the person that every time you're going to meet with them, you're more and more impressed for different reasons, right? And because that's what builds these meaningful relationships. So those skills, which are the same as hiring or all that kind of stuff, that's what's interesting to develop. This is more of how do you, in an hour or two, get to the, without having experience, the depth of what a human is about, what their qualities and weaknesses are. It's all psychology, human relations, and has very little to do with money or technology or ideas at the end of the day. So I would focus on that. I would build a workshop around that. How do I look? How does a Tony look at? How does a Marcel? How does Sophie? How do these guys look at a various number of ideas, and look for the same kind of thought qualities in the people that brought them to you? That would be one way to do it, which is what we call calibration when we're hiring. We interview people that already work for us for jobs they don't want. Right?
And by the way, they're all a little bit crazy. So you need to look
you want
at
that too.
Yeah.
If the person's coming off as normal, it's like something's wrong. They're in the bell curve, right? Remember, the bell curve is failure.
There's something crazy about them because they will never go to the extent of what's needed to build it if they're not a bit crazy.
Are we supposed to look for similarities with successful founders like you into the old founders that we might meet?
So
I don't know. It's really hard to.
I'm not sure I understand. Ask your question differently. What's?
Are we? Should we try to take examples and models from successful founders that we could?
Well, because you don't know them,
No.
so you don't listen to the bullshit that you read online, right? That's pointless. Almost everything that's written about every company online is wrong. I know some of these successful companies, and if you read you're like, this is ridiculous, it has nothing to do with what's going on the inside. So first of all, unless you know people like that, that's generally wrong. Again, this comes down to experience, unfortunately. It's at some point you get enough archetypes, right? And people tend to, you're not a beautiful, unique snowflake. I'm sorry to break it to you. There's a lot of people that behave in a very similar way, cultural upbringing, mental structure. So after a while, you're going to recognize these patterns of, one of them is the CEO that it's always awesome. Like he comes in and he pitches you and it's always great. And every time you give him feedback, he's like, yeah, that's a great idea, and he fucking doesn't do any of it. And
That's
it's all
I call
shit on
them the
inside.
Jello CEOs. We had a
The-
few of those.
So
You can't grab
you
them.
can't. It's always fine. It's always
Yeah.
yeah, man. We're gonna do this. This is awesome. Like we're not running out of money. Like and yeah, that's great feedback. I'm noting it, and then he throws it away and goes and does he goes and goofs off. Like there's a lot of guys like that. So eventually like you go through once. Right, and this is one of those cases where the first meeting's the best opinion you'll ever have of that person. It's all downhill, and then you're like, how the fuck did I get tricked by this dude? And you start like back engineering.
And I've been doing this for 25 years and I still get tricked. So it's really hard. Because some of them, and I call them the McKinsey type, right? They're really, really good at selling. Their PowerPoints are amazing, very colorful, amazing graphs and everything. And they're very convincing. Like they tell you, and they're energetic, and they're selling, and they look good, and they even dress like they would usually wear a suit, but they know, so they dress as the startup and everything, and they pitch and they can trick you, you know. But they really don't know a thing about building a startup, and they usually are the grin fuck, like they always agree and they never execute, and those are the worst, and they're really, really hard to find. But they usually. When they go, they usually study at McGill and then they get hired by McKinsey. And that's the profile. So if you find that profile, just run away because they're really bad at startups.
The other thing you'll have is the big company guy that's like, oh yeah, I was executing new market development. He thinks he's a startup founder. This guy's actually pathetic because he actually thinks he can do it. And that flames pretty quickly. The other one you have is the super nerd. His technology can do everything. Like his technology is amazing. Oh, he can do that too. And like, and he has his 3 PhDs in this thing you've never heard of, and he'll convince you like, you know, Wolfram Alpha bullshit. Like, so you actually encounter like these archetypes, and usually you can bucket the person that's in front of you.
But some of them are hard because you think they're the thing, but they've got this missing link. It's really hard.
So that part comes with time, but what's more important is how they think about problems. So the way, for example, we interview is we have a certain set of questions that are designed to probe for different things. So one of them is creativity. Another one will be their ability to handle complexity. These things I was talking about. So we kind of zoom down, this, how do you evaluate somebody's soul in 60 minutes to, if they have these couple of markers, I'm not going to touch them, right? They can't deal with complexity. So you just basically try to eliminate the person off of one thing that you know is going to be needed that's missing from there.
You said entrepreneur needs to be crazy. Do most of them realize they're crazy, or for them it's just normal behavior?
I think they think they're normal.
And actually, I think it depends on, so when you're 25, 30, and you're nuts, like you actually think you're fine. It's basically when you arrive later in life, you're like, wow, I was a complete nut job when I was 30. Like that.
And now you think you're normal, but you're still not normal. Some of them are like perfectionists, like to the extreme. Like I think Steve Jobs was like that, but we have some in our portfolio. Like they're just extreme. Like you see to the extreme, they're gonna go and like obsess. Like Fred is obsessive a little bit or a lot, but but they will obsess until they get it right, but to the extreme, So that's the crazy part of talking about. Can be hard to detect in the beginning because it becomes more with when they build their project and they obsess about it. But
there's also a bad kind of crazy, right? Like we're joking about this, but there's a whole other spectrum of behaviors you don't want. Most people that are good entrepreneurs that have been doing this for a while,
images in my mind.
They'll have a minimum of introspective capabilities. Some people are not crazy, but they just have no ability to realize who they are. They don't realize what they're projecting. Most founders will have enough ability to self-analyze, and the reason is your people work for you. So if you don't realize what you're projecting, you're going to cause a lot of collateral damage. And there's a few founders that are like that, but most of them are actually pretty good. Even the worst sociopaths tend to be able to at least realize. Most people that are good founders, they're going to know that they're wired differently, right? But when you are that, it's the other people that are weird, right? So if you have somebody who's been an entrepreneur for a long period of time, he'll think that most people are just lame, right? That's actually something we look for, is for people that are like, they don't think that they're awesome. You don't want that, but they're like, yeah, most people can't do this. Like they're not very good at math, or they're not very good at, whatever the, being obsessive, for example. So you want people that kind of realize that they're outliers in that way. But when you're different, no matter what different is, that's your normal, right? So you never really realize what it looks like from the outside, which is probably a good thing, because a lot of this stuff is is to the extreme. And what happens is, founders build the companies that they are the founder of. The culture of a company, this mythical thing that everybody talks, is 80% the founders.
Yeah.
Right? So ultimately, you end up creating the company that you can run almost all the time, right? And when you don't, the company usually fails. So what you're going to end up with is 100, 1,000, or 10,000 people that are pretty much just as crazy as the guy that you invested in, right?
That's why BlackBerry failed,
Yeah,
by
it's
the
exactly.
way.
That's
Wrong
exactly.
culture.
Yeah, it's exactly where BlackBerry failed.
Big
And-
ego, not focused on the business. They were not paranoid. They should have been paranoid the day Apple launched the App Store. But
It's a great example. That's an amazing example of a company. It doesn't matter how big the company gets if the founders are bad founders. That's an example of right place, right time. How the fuck did you get so rich? Like, that's a great example of that. Those guys had no business being that successful. They just had one idea that for some reason nobody until Steve Jobs took a crack at they could touch, and Steve just destroyed them in 2 years, right? So that company was rotten at every level that I could tell. I've never seen a good person come out of that company. The culture was shit. Like, I'm kind of wondering if Uber is that right now. You're reading a lot about that. It's unclear. I think that might also be one of those things. It's totally not clear. But the personality, the limitations of the founder will percolate all the way down, even 20,000 employees. It's gonna be the norm everywhere. That's why you have things like Zappos. Dude lives in a trailer with llamas, even though he's worth $1 billion. Obsessed about customer service of all things. That company's unbreakable. Right? Same thing for Jeff Bezos, in a good and a bad way. Those traits that make them outliers, crazy you can redefine as an outlier, not being in the middle of the bell curve. Those traits will create the entire company. And that's why you see very few of these companies that are successful. When there's a CEO change, they usually crash, because the CEO is no longer a fit for the company.
yeah, Apple. I went through a study once that I thought was really interesting. They looked at all the VC-backed company in the US, and they looked at all the founders, and they put them in buckets. And they had 2 buckets. One of them they called the lamb, and the other one they called the cheetah type founder, right? And most VCs back company, the CEO was a lamb, and very few were a cheetah. And obviously the cheetah outperformed the lamb by 10 times. And what was the characteristic of the cheetah is, and it's really, and I think it's very relevant to what you guys are doing, because when they were, as a VC, when you make an investment, you meet the founders and so on, you usually talk to people about them to find out what they've done, and you take references and everything. If you take a reference on the cheetah, it's 50-50. 50% of the people hate them and never want to deal with them because they find them rude or they've done something bad to them. 50% of them are in love with them and want to follow them everywhere. The lamb, it's amazing reference all across, because the lamb, they manage by consensus. So everybody needs to agree, they lead, and they ask the opinion of everybody, and then they make a decision, but they very slow, and they don't make a decision very fast, and so on. Where the cheetah are like, I'm gonna do this, if you don't like it, leave. And actually, they usually fought with a lot of people along the way, because they had to fight their way to get to where they want. So after people actually want to kill them. So if you're a VC and you take references and you take it for a word, and we've taken references on people where some of it was really negative, but you have to understand what it is, where it comes from and what is it, and if you invest in the cheetah, 10% more chances. So this is why we're saying they're a bit crazy, because they find their way up there, but they're not the same as the leader of a big company where everybody loves them and they ask your opinion before. I'm sure you don't ask the opinion of everybody before you make a decision.
No, I'm not known for doing that. No, but I'll give you another example. When we raised the last round, anytime when you raise any significant round, they do what's called due diligence. So they ask you a infinite list of pointless things that they have to ask just to make sure that they've checked stuff. And we were going through all of the employee contracts, and I think this was Stephanie, I can't remember, and it was like, here are all the employees, and we had 25 people or something like that as a pile, and going through them, making sure that we have the employment contracts and everything. And then there's this other pile that's this high, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? And he says, oh, that's all the people you fired. And I realized that there were like 3 times more people that I'd fired over the course of the last 8 years than the number of people working in the company. So if you ask around in Montreal, there's a lot of people that don't like me, right? And so, but that's
Also because he never filters what he says,
Yeah.
so that's another.
So you're going to see a lot of collateral damage in that sense, but was it the right thing to not have those people work at Hopper? Absolutely. Are they bad people? Absolutely not. They just weren't a fit. And ultimately, the height of that stack is me getting good at reading all the same stuff that you're doing. Today, if you look at the last 2 years, there is no pie like that. Like we get it right almost all the time, and I'm not the one doing the hiring anymore. But it took me 8 years of slaughtering
Maybe
people
that's
to figure
why.
out. We'll see.
You fixed the
No,
problem.
actually, there's a few people that are way worse than me. I've actually had to, like in engineering, like I've had to go like, no, you can't.
Well, because he comes from the beginning. In
Yeah,
the
that's
beginning,
true,
they were
that's
in
true.
my office, him and Joost, and I remember they used to spend days interviewing people. And then I would talk to my partner and say, because they were like 2, trying to hire 1. And I was like, so is the team growing? Well, they hired a guy 2 weeks ago, but now he's gone. So it took them a month, and now they're, so we were like, we're never gonna get away from that because the company can't grow. They hire 2, fire 1, and then the other one, and then they hire 1, and then it took them like, how many?
It took us forever. It took us forever.
It was you, Joost, and then the other one that sticks was the
Well, there's Sebastian who still works for us. That's it.
yeah.
And then there's no, everybody else is gone.
It was very discouraging.
Ultimately, we realized we had to source differently and all that kind of stuff. But
No, but it's fine.
Yeah.
You did it right. I mean, you were extremely picky. And the other challenge is if you're a startup of 2 that nobody knows with a bit of money in Montreal and you want to hire the 2%, it's really hard because nobody wants to come work for you. You can be very smart and charismatic and everything, and you have this project where you're trying to boil the ocean that is impossible to do, and you're trying to convince them to do that. It's very, very hard. Now, I mean, it's much easier
yeah,
to.
it is now.
yeah.
It is, yes.
So kind of focusing on growing teams and growing cultures, I think it's really popular saying that the first 10 employees are the most important. Fred, you've once said to me that after 25 people at a company, things get weird and messy.
Well, you've
so-
seen it here.
Yeah.
It took about a week.
So what would you guys say is something to keep in mind as a VC helping a company and as a founder building a company? What traits do those first 10, 25, whatever metric you want to call
Yeah,
it?
I gave the list previously. That whatever. So some people taking notes. It's really all that stuff.
Why
Uh,
is it getting weird?
Sorry?
Why
Oh,
is
it's
it
because it's, yeah, that's a, so what happens, there are 2, okay, so let's start at the beginning. The Roman army, right? So the Roman army was the most scalable organization ever created and probably still is, right? It basically conquered all of Western, civilization and held it for 2,000 years. The base of the Roman army was what was called a squad, 8 guys. And the reason it was 8 guys is because that's what you could fit in a tent. They fought together, obviously, but they slept together, they ate together. Like, that was the unit. And the reason that that is the fundamental unit of 8 is that if you take 60 people and you ask one person to command those 60 people, in any environment where there's complexity, it's impossible. If you want to just charge at the enemy's line like a bunch of barbarians, you can train anybody to do that. But the Roman army, they fought with a system, right? They had system of cavalry, system of deployment. They had shields that they used differently. Like all this stuff that you've seen is actually true. So in order to organize, even 60 people, forget 60,000, 60 people, you can't have one person barking out orders to 60 people. It doesn't work. But one person can control 7 other people. Right? So the same unit applies to anything. If you have a startup and there's 8 or 10, you can kind of add 2 to that, you can keep it as we're in a tent. You add the 11th person to that, doesn't fit in the tent anymore, it all goes to fuck. And so the problem is, as soon as you pass like the 10, you can kind of get away with a little bit of meeting here, meeting there, until you reach about 20. Like you can have 2 tents, because you put them next to each other. But as soon as there's a 3rd tent, Then this tent doesn't know what this one's doing because this one's in the middle. That's when you hit 25. It's basically the notion of 3 times 8 guys, everything goes down. And at that point, you have to start siloing your company. You have to say, you don't get to come to this meeting because we don't care what you think about this. Go fucking do that because that's what we need. And as soon as you do that, the entire culture changes.
Especially when the person was in the first tent and was in every meeting and then doesn't need to be in every meeting. It's really problematic.
There's an inflection point around, you kind of want to keep everything under 25, and this is a rule of thumb. And I've seen startups, like they raise $6 million, they don't have product market fit, they get to 46, first time CEO, like it's like, you're doomed. Like no matter what you do now, you've dug a hole so deep that you're not gonna be able to get out of it. This will only get better when you fire 30 people, you should do it right now. And he's like, I just raised the money last week. I said, fire 30 people and then come back and see me. And inevitably, 4 years later, they come back and they say, there's only 12 of us left. What should I do? Right? So, but it's the 10th problem. It's that mechanism. It has nothing to do with anything except the fact that you cannot communicate around one table at that point, and you need a completely different set of mechanisms. And the temptation is to hire some VP from Expedia that knows what he's doing, and he's going to fuck up your culture. There's all these bad solutions to it. But the ultimate solution is you actually have to, have proper control and command in every tent, and then roll that up into one other tent. There's 8 guys, right?
Good point.
Sorry, so there was a question before.
Yeah, well, take that as my answer.
But I have a question to bounce on that. You have so much knowledge, for example, that comparison with Roman army. I'm sure it comes from a reading and conversation. Do you keep time in your schedule to learn stuff? How do you? You're so busy as VC and as entrepreneur. Is that part of your schedule? How do you educate yourself, basically?
As a VC, our job, other than meeting people and trying to find the 2%, is information. So we read all the time. I mean, I read everything that's happening in the tech, everything that's happening in the VC, stuff happening in my company. I spend a lot of time reading. I meet companies, but other than that, I read.
We have no time to read. So the way that our job is execution, right? If I'm reading shit, like I shouldn't be the CEO of something. The way it usually happens for us is one of 2 things. I'll meet somebody who's a peer, and he'll have read this stupid blog post, and he'll tell it to me, and it fits the problem that I have now. And then I say, well, okay, that's a nice story, but did it really work? And he's like, yeah, this part's true, this part isn't. So a lot of it is, the only time that I spend trying to perfect my skills now is I talk to people that are one ahead of what I'm doing, right? So we spent a whole bunch of time with the Airbnb founders last summer. It's like, how did it go when you went from like 20 to 2,000? Like, and he's like, oh, that was terrible. What about like your engineering team is 400? Like, how many CTOs did you go through? It was 17. It's like, so like you just go. It's like, you have any tips for me? Nope. It's like you got to find the right guy. So you go through that stuff with guys that are ahead of you because they've just seen some of that stuff, and they're hard to find. But at some point, you can. It's the hustle. You just reach out, and then from time to time, you'll hit a problem. You're like, this doesn't feel right. I'm doing something wrong. He's doing something wrong. There's something, and then you start digging. And then if you're lucky, you'll read some stupid thing on Medium. One of the most random things that happened to me is Wayne Gretzky. So you can trace, like literally when we were kind of struggling to when it started working, to this one stupid Wayne Gretzky quote, which has been around forever. For some reason, I'd never seen it. And it's actually attributed to Steve Jobs, because he stole it from Wayne Gretzky, because Steve Jobs stole a lot of things. This is one of them. So Wayne Gretzky, if you look at him statistically, he's the best scorer. Like, there's nothing close to him in professional hockey. He's so far ahead, even today, of any of these guys that are awesome. And so there's a reporter at the end of his career. He says, like, Wayne, how do you explain how good you are? Right? And some people had theories that his eyes were kind of like out,
lasers.
Yeah, like they were kind of out, like they were kind of like exorbitant, so he could see whiter and all this crap. And he's like, listen, it's very, very simple. Everybody on the ice skates to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going. It's like a stupid, like you put that on a T-shirt, right? Like it's so dumb. But I read that attributed to Steve Jobs, and I realized it was Wayne Gretzky, and then I realized something. Very, very simple is everybody that has a startup is skating, almost everybody is skating to where the puck is. They're like, oh, I'm gonna do something like Pinterest. You can see that these waves, right? Like now everybody's trying to start
AI.
AI. Or they're starting like this. Oh, another way to decommoditize inventory. So it's gonna be a bike rental startup by the hour where people like
An Uber for bike.
Yeah, an Uber for this. Yeah. So everybody's in that. But if you go back to when these things were successful, right? Like people will write user reviews for free for no money, like Yelp and TripAdvisor. People will post videos of themselves online for free, and then somebody will run an ad on it, but that's not what it'll be for free, and people will do millions of these, and people will actually watch these videos of cats all day. That's YouTube. Social network, you're gonna put all of your personal life online. Like, you're gonna prostitute your house to strangers for $140 a night? Like, you're gonna take some random dude that doesn't have a license, is gonna show up in a Corolla, and you're gonna tell him where you wanna go, and like, think of what these ideas, they make no sense, right? When you look at them. Those are ideas that the puck is over here, it just happens it's gonna go there. And interestingly enough, Google tried to start Uber. They actually coded the whole thing, but on a laptop, and it didn't work, right? So the thing about the way that this works is, if you're actually building something that makes any sense when you start it, it's probably not going to work. So at some point, we'd been flat, even though we had good technology. I couldn't get traction. I'm like, okay, what do we do? Oh, let's shut down what we're doing. Second, let's shut down the website.
I
Right?
remember when he told me that.
I
had a
asked
harder
everybody I knew, should I shut down my website and go mobile? They're
go to
like,
the
are you
rest.
out of your mind? Like, that's only 10% of the category. Why are you doing that? And then because of this stupid Wayne Gretzky code, I'm
Drank too
like,
much
that's
Coke.
what I'm doing. Because mobile is going to be the thing. We have to stop focusing on what's working now. So you'll see very few entrepreneurs that are thinking that way. They're all trying to replicate the thing that happened last month with a slight twist on it. And it takes a long time to get out of that when you're a founder, because it's easy. Yeah, it's going to be like Uber, but for chickens. You're like, yeah, that's a good idea. Like, why wouldn't Uber work for chickens, right? Like, no, do something that's completely insane, that makes no sense, right? And figure out a way to make that work. Because if you're lucky enough, the market will go there, and then you'll be alone. All these other dudes thought the puck was there, and now and you're the only one with the stick and the puck, right? That's the fundamental thing that changed how we perform. That stuff I probably read on a T-shirt, right? Like, your mind kind of gets in a state where it's stuck, and you start looking for the answer to the problem you haven't really defined, but you know it's wrong, and then some idiot walks up with a bumper sticker, and you're like, that's the meaning of life. That's what I'm going to do next. A lot of it is that. These guys, they actually have a process for research, and they try to take stuff in. The good people that I know, you have a problem, and then you obsess. You're like, how am I going to solve this? How am I going to solve it? And then something happens, and you take it there. That Roman army thing was literally, I was trying to explain to somebody how to run a team that had never done it before, and I couldn't figure out a way to convey what I know instinctively. And just by the way you guys reacted, I tried a whole bunch of things, and like, what does lemming have to do with things? And then I tried the Roman army, and she's like, oh, I understand that. It's a tent, right? So that's how you come up with these things, is you get stuck in a hole, and then you search for the answer, even though if you don't know what that answer is going to be, and that's how we learn.
I think jumping on what Fred said about not investing in the obvious and ideas that make sense. Like, I think this would be particularly true for student-owned campuses. Like, most of students are building like yet another parking app or those kind of like problems that exist, but nobody has like found a way. Like, our only chance of making money is by betting an idea that looks totally crazy. We're gonna lose money. Like, only chance we can do returns is by finding like that one crazy guy that built something that everybody was like, this is never gonna work. Like, this is our only shot. So yeah, let's not waste time on obvious.
If it's a copycat of something else with a twist, just don't do it. It doesn't matter. You want your portfolio to make almost no sense, especially for what you guys are doing. For her, it's a little bit different. If she's writing $5 million checks, they have to have a little bit more fit. But a lot of stuff that they're funding, there's a thing with magnets. Like, this thing is amazing, right? So it's like, what? Mark pitched out there. I'm like, what? What are you saying? I see these magnet guys from Russia. And I'm like, that's either going to be great or terrible. You have to feel like that, right? And it's probably going to be great based on what I've heard. So if it feels like just another Me Too extension of the thing that was in Wired magazine or Inc., it's probably a bad idea.
to jump in a bit about the hard times of Opera, on both your perspective. Sophie, I think you mentioned like you need investors to be trusting you and having faith in you. Can you tell, like, we also always see the big like startup success stories from the moment they get traction and like nobody hear about like the really, really hard times. Can you just like tell us about what was the hardest? And
Yeah, you want kind of the origin story. Yeah. Well, first of all, we were 2 years too early. We could have, those 2 years, I could have put Sophie's money in a GIC and gone snowboarding, and there'd be no different outcome. So we were trying to do big data before Cassandra or HBase came out. Like there was literally nothing. The only thing that existed was a paper called Big Table from Google. So I remember we installed this thing called HBase V01, and in the comments it said, "This is my project to teach myself Java." And somehow I didn't see that as a warning sign. We're like, let's do this. That's when she's talking about crazy. To me, that wasn't a problem. And so then, of course, instead of buying proper computers, we ordered $30,000 worth of spare gamer parts, from like the stuff that they put in Alienware devices. We went to IKEA. We bought shelves for a garage, plexiglass, and we Velcroed this crap with no cooling in her office.
Cupboard.
in the place where you keep the brooms. It was
Yeah.
literally that. We emptied that out, put the brooms in the hallway, and we started that. And then of course everything overheated and flamed.
Yeah.
Some dude came in and said, "Well, if you incline the plexiglass, at least the heat will escape." And I'm
No,
like,
he told me this was our office and we were subleasing to them. And they say, well, we're gonna put the server in the closet there and can you do that with your landlord? I'm like, I don't think so, but okay, do it. Then he came back and says, it's actually a little bit warm, so you know what, we'll dig a little hole in the wall so the air can come out. Do you think it's gonna be a problem? I think so, but it's okay, we'll put something in front, plant in front so they don't see. Comes back and says, we actually need to rewire the entire building because we don't have enough electricity to wire our thing. Do you think it's a problem?
we ended up, the whole top of this thing was blown out on the side of the court. I wasn't here, but it was like a room like that. This is actually our second server room that was in where that conference was. So anyway, point is, like, that was a complete waste of time. We should have done nothing. And then when we actually got the tech to work, which is almost 3 years after foundation, like again, too early, we actually started accruing data, and we stabilized the database, but then what we were doing with it was crap because we didn't correctly understand how to manipulate this information. We had no experience in big data, and there's very few people that did. Nobody
but you learned through that,
so
though.
we just mistake, and then we ended up with a product, and we launched it, which wasn't great. It was like 5% of it was doing something useful, and then 90% was so much noise. And the problem is, if we'd launched that in 1997, because things were really shitty on the internet in 1997, right? It would have been awesome, but it's like, oh, now we have another 20 years to catch up with what Google's doing in terms of that. And then beyond that, the main mistake that I'd made, this was pre-Wayne Gretzky revelation, is I was trying to rebuild the search engine. Well, that's dumb. Like, you're never going to beat Google at being Google. It's just never going to happen, right? So we had this metaphor about free text. And then free text search is the hardest thing in the world to do. You should never try that. You're just going to hurt yourself. So, like,
And a lot of startups still try.
to do
You're
it,
going to have a
like-
lot of people telling you they can do semantics better than anybody else because they all try.
It's all bullshit. It doesn't matter. Like, all that kind of stuff. So then we had a thing, and it was pretty mediocre, and everybody was telling me I was a loser because we'd spent 6 years building it. But underneath there was this insane stack of data, and one of the things we were accumulating is flight data. And so this thing was kind of limping along, and it was growing 30% a month, but I knew what a startup was supposed to do. It's supposed to have a singularity. It's supposed to go up. And then one of the things that we were doing is, in order to get people to discover this site, we were taking the air data component that we had, and we started doing trends. So we had these reports that said, if you shop from New York to Los Angeles on a Tuesday, the average ticket price is going to be $5 less than on a Wednesday. And I had worked for the guys that had done Zillow, and they did a great job just getting a ton of coverage by pricing every home in the United States. By the way, they sunk $80 million before they launched. They were burning 6.5 million US a month, aggregating county level home data. I remember I was touring Lloyd's office. He had 126 people toiling away.
And he had no idea what he was doing. At
He
that
said,
point.
all I want to do is get enough. I want a model that can predict every home price in the U.S. and it'll be fine. And I'm like, you're burning $6 million. I was just counting the heads. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, how much have you raised? 80 million. I was like, you haven't launched? He's like, no. How much have you burned? 70. And I'm like, he's like, it's gonna be fine. We're gonna get there. We're gonna figure this out. It's gonna be fine. So like that was my model, right? So we're like,
I remember.
right? So it's like, but one of the things they'd done very well is then they started rolling up and they were saying, oh, we expect the Miami, condo prices to go down by 6%. And then the real estate crisis hit in 2008, right? Everybody on earth wanted to know what their home was worth, and that's when Zillow took off, right? After burning $80 million. They actually laid off 50% of the company before they hit that. And by the way, Zillow's a $7 billion company today, right? So they laid off half of those 125 people. So you want to, like, the valley of death, right? It happens to everybody, even the best guys. And these are the guys that founded Expedia, that was a $12 billion company before that, right? So these guys knew what they were doing, and they still laid off half their team, right, after burning through 80 million. So anyway, we're looking at that going, oh, let's put out some data about airfare. And we had this one thing where we realized that when Colorado legalized weed, air travel went up 20%. And so we went to journalists and pitched that, and it went national. Every newspaper ran that. People were calling us, "Are you the weed guys?" We're like, "No, no, we're travel." Right? It took us a year to get out of that weed thing, right? So, but then we realized that if you fed journalists data about something that mattered to them, not your startup, they would write about it, and then you'd get some inbound traffic. So we do that. I find this amazing girl that still runs all of our PR, and she starts pitching 100 people a day, and we start to get some traction. And at some point, we pitch a guy at the New York Times, and he looks at this, and he doesn't write about the story that we're pitching, like the weed, he doesn't care. But he looks at the page that spits out these graphs, because we always link them to the source of the data, so they want to make sure that we're real. And then he starts playing with it, and it's a form. It looks like it's out of 1994, think Craigslist. It's orange. I don't know why it was orange, right? It's like departure, airport, arrival, airport, and then you have these error bar charts, like the most dense data science thing in the world, right? It says, the statistical variation of leaving on Tuesday. It makes no sense unless you're a data-driven journalist, and it's not even cool. But it tells you that if there's a 30% chance that you shop on Thursday and leave on Wednesday, you'll save $15. And any route that you enter, it spits that super dense thing out. Guy writes about that. He says, there's a startup that has a page that'll tell you how to save money on airfare, right? So they publish it on the New York Times on Friday. It hits #1 most emailed article by the end of the day of the freaking New York Times. I don't know if you know like what that is. They run it in print on Saturday. On Monday morning, I get up. I was staying at a hotel in Copley Place in Boston. I start walking to work. Somebody emails me the servers are down, and we're on Good Morning America. And I'm like, how? What? Basically, that thing that the New York Times wrote throughout the weekend had just gone national. It was on Good Morning America, the Today Show, the NBC News. There's a website that tells you, and so, but it's like, it's not on our homepage. So
It's not even the website.
50,000 people sign up to the homepage. It doesn't do this. So we have to like move them around. By noon, we'd killed our website, put this thing at the basically the 1994 webpage was at hopper.com. At least people weren't like yelling at us on Twitter. They couldn't find a thing they saw on Good Morning America. And we ended up with 1 million visitors, in about 4 weeks, right? So we're like, okay, that's interesting. I'm like, that's gonna shark fin. At some point, people are gonna realize this is stupid, and they're gonna stop doing it. It never really went down. We were holding at 600,000 visitors on the web. And then it started trending internationally, Brazil, Japan, like all this stuff was like, I was reading an article in Japanese, like there's a website in the US that tells you how to save on travel. And it's like, this is crazy. And then it hit the local news. So after a while, this is how the news works. About a week after the national outlets cover it, the local guys cover it. So this is like, the guys in Vermont, right? If you watch, so this was in Florida. Local news crew goes out. This guy prints out in black and white this report that we have with the error bars in Florida. He goes, and this is like, Fort Lauderdale, so all retired people. He hands this to 2 elderly women. They're in their early 70s at best, right? They put on their glasses. He says, there's a new website that can tell you how to save money on travel. And these elderly are looking at this like, I'm not very good at mathematics, but I think that this says that I'll save $15 on if I shop on Tuesdays. And then she's like, oh yeah, I would use this website. And we're looking at this going like, this is insane. Like, this is completely nuts. So then I went to the board and I said, I'm killing what we do. First of all, I surveyed the employees. Not that I care, but I did it just for management. So if you think that
He's a lamb.
Yeah, if you think that we should kill everything we've been doing for 6.5 years and focus on the stupid report, go to this side of the room. If you think this is dumb and we should keep doing what we're doing, the company splits in half. Like literally, like I have the same number of people, like on each side of the room. I go to the board and I remember there's 3 investors. There's, do it, don't do it, I abstain. I was like, that's very useful. And so, but by then I knew this wasn't a decision, right? You get 1 million users on something, that's the startup gods are telling you, like, here, do this, right? And so we went all in on it. We ended up throwing away about 50% of what it cost $12 million to build, right? So that statement that I gave isn't exactly true, but the part that we kept was actually really good. It's still the best in the world. Most of it is actually under your feet still. The servers are actually.
But the other thing he said to the board is he said, I'm going to go mobile only and I'm going to shut down the website.
That was a week later.
Yeah, a week later. And we were like, okay, can we think about it for like 24 hours? No, I want to do it now. But we've just spent like $12 million building that website. No, mobile only. And we
That was
said,
also the best.
and then it's the trust. We said, well, you know what you're doing. You think it's the way to go. Go. And he did it.
I didn't say it because of Wayne Gretzky. I always like. I read this thing that Wayne Gretzky said, and I want to shut down the website.
Why mobile only? Why not?
Why? So there's
Because of the puck.
there's a lot, yeah, there's a lot of reasons.
It's
It is the
true.
puck.
It is the
puck.
puck.
It is the puck. So
Yeah.
So it's actually not as insane as I'm making it come out to be. So I was on the board of Make My Trip. I joined in 2006, and this is what, 2011 or 12 or something like that. So I had been basically on the board of the largest online travel agency. They're the Expedia of India, 60% market share, great founding team. And in 2010, we'd taken it public, so I'd seen the whole thing grow. And so I'd been on this board, went to India 3-4 times a year. And India is a mobile first market. Today, China's a mobile-only market. Latin America's a mobile-only market. But in 2013, 14, that wasn't necessarily the case here. There was still, in 2013, 14, about 10, 12% of travel that was being bought on phones, right? And the phones were pretty shitty. Just take an iPhone 1 in your hand and you'll realize, right? And so, but in India, what had happened is the market had gotten flooded by good but low-cost Android phones, right? That had big screens, but they didn't cost $600 US. So what we'd seen is 12%, 12.5%, 13%. These were quarterly, right? So the 14%, 48% in one quarter. 48% of all travel was sold on mobile in India. And that coincided with all the Xiaomi phones coming in and all that kind of stuff. So I'm like, wait, so people want to do this. It's just in India, they had no phones. And I'm like, in the US, we have a lot of laptops, but we probably want to do it. And if this generation won't, the next one will. And the millennials demographically were there, but they were all still in school. Like in the next 2 years, they're starting to have jobs and have disposable income. That was number one. So I'd actually seen it happen, right? It wasn't magic. The second thing is when we had that report up, at some point we put a list of flights and we said, okay, so we'll give you a report. We'll show you flights, you'll pick one. Then I'll link you to the airline website, you'll buy it there, and I'll put together an ad model, and they'll pay me for those referrals, right? That's like, we'll make money that way.
Old traditional model.
Old traditional model made a lot of sense, right? Of course, super easy. So I put that up. We start sending referrals to American Airlines, Delta, United, and Southwest. And I'm doing this trick that I learned. I'll send them 50,000 passengers. Remember, I have 1 million users, right? So I'll send them 50,000 free passengers. And once that's done, I'll fly down to Dallas and I'll say, hey, you have to pay me now, right? So we put this up, we get sued by Southwest and American Airlines. They say, you are not allowed to send us
Passengers.
unrequested passengers. You're sending us business that we're not allowing you to send us, and you're misusing our brand. And so I'm like, that's great. Like, it's awesome. Like, now I have what I thought was a business model is actually a liability. And American Airlines pulled out of Hopper. I'm like, wow. Like, what do I do now, right? And so I was like, you're not paying me. It's like, no, we don't care. You're just not allowed. And I'm like, what's your fucking logic? And they said, well, every time you send us a passenger, it's because you stole it from AmericanAirlines.com. If you hadn't existed, that person would have booked direct. I'm like, that's retarded. Like, who thinks that way? Turns out airlines do. So then I'm like, okay, how does this work? What do I do? Then I called them back and I said, if I sent them to you from a phone, and they're like, yeah, that's not the same thing. We don't book on our app. And I'm like, okay. That was the logic. I mean, what are you going to do, right? Like,
We've learned through Hopper that airlines,
yes.
yeah.
There's a reason the industry's never turned a profit.
I think, Sophie, what was your, like, I'm sure you were, of the 3 boards members, you were the one to say go ahead with your pivot, but managing other board members or just like as a board, what was the process like?
Well, I think at Hopper we were kind of, the beginning it was us on the board basically for a long time. And then we had a large fund come in, and my comment on rotating board members. So the large fund that invested second, I knew the guy from a long time. Fred knew him, and we really liked him, the manager. And he was really aligned with us. He was amazing. He was from the startup culture. He knew, and so still the dynamic was very positive. And then Jeff from Atlas also really aligned. So I think from that dynamic, it was always very positive. It's when we started having outsiders, so the people that had done the original deal at this big institution started changing because the guy left, and then we had another one and another one. That's where the dynamic is very difficult. And I remember having a discussion with Fred where our board meetings, when we were only us and Jeff, basically, it was like no bullshit, very transparent, and tell us everything that's happening, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And BrightSpark, we like to manage that way. We want to know the good news, the bad news all the time, because what's the point of having a show in front of your board and just making it look good and whatever? You're there to, like Fred said, to have people that are not there today and will tell you, what the hell are you doing, right? So Fred was probably one of our CEOs that is the most transparent, so he's going to tell you everything, sometimes even worse than it is, so you're freaked out and then, it's not that bad, but, he's going to tell you everything, which worked really well. But then when you start having outsider, the problem is those people are not usually emotionally involved in the company, and they have other things that they're managing in the background. So they inherited that investment, and then they need to either they don't like the guy that was there before, or they don't really want to take care of that investment, so they want to get rid of it, or a lot of dynamics can come into play, and sometimes they actually have the wrong culture and the wrong reflex, so you need to manage them, which can become an issue. So the board evolves, so you kind of, and he's going to answer probably better than I do, but you kind of divide the way you communicate the information. So you've got the official board information, and then you've got, the real shit happening with the people that you trust, because some of the information you cannot share with everybody because they can't handle it. If you go to your board and you say, guys, we're going to run out of money in 6 months, I'm in trouble, I don't know what I'm doing, and you're in this trust environment, which happened with us in the early days, then you're going to be, okay, what are we going to do? Let's try to find a solution. You can do this, you can do that, and try to find a solution together. If you're in a position where your board is not aligned, some people will just freak out. Oh, we need to shut it down, we need to fire this and fire that, and they're just going to panic, where you can't do that in an environment. But as your company evolves, your board dynamics will change.
I think there's one important thing. If you remember back, when these decisions came up, you and I essentially controlled the company.
Yeah.
So that's actually a very important thing. The founder's going to give up a substantial amount for the first seed round and the A investment. At that point in time, if Sophie and I wanted to do something, and it's a little bit more complicated than that because VCs have these shareholder agreements that are like phone books, but essentially, like, we could get anything done. And if something was technically not possible, I could just go like, I'm gonna quit, and you can like freak everybody out and get it done, right? So the good thing too is that Jeff is very, very close to the kind of culture that we have now. He's probably even more extreme than we are in a lot of these things. So between the three of us, you know, we had the majority to override anything, right? And that continued to be true for actually a long time after that, as we were, you know, struggling with the consequences of all these decisions, right? So I was talking about the mobile-only stuff as being fun, but then we're like, well, how do we get a download, right? Like, there are a lot of problems that came out of those radical decisions. The one thing about skating to where the puck isn't is that you can actually get it wrong. And you're like, well, nothing's happening over here, right? So this sounds like it was easy, but it was not after that. So we had full control over everything. That's one thing. The other thing that it's also important to understand is that venture capitalists are very different. This is Canada, so most of the money comes from pension funds and the government. The people that represent pension funds and the government, they can be amazing people, but there's a higher chance there's going to be churn, right? Because they don't have their own money in this and all that kind of stuff. So you could have an amazing guy. The chance that that person is going to be there in a year is much lower than a Sophie or a Jeff who, you know, have basically founded their own funds. But more importantly, their responsibility to the entity that they work for is not the same as Sophie. Right? I can go, oh, fuck, we're going to die. And she's going to be like, yeah, sure, we've seen that 20 times, figure it out. But the guy that, you know, works for the government
will panic.
He has to file a report on that and all this stuff, right? So even the best of them are going to have to figure out, well, how do I put they're going to die into a report that actually is going to make some sense, right? So that's one thing. And the danger when you have these later stage bigger entities is that they'll do the wrong thing. So if a CEO is running out of money, but the company has potential, what does the CEO have to do? Raise more money, right? So what happens if there's a board meeting where I say, hey, we have 6 months of runway, and then some investor panics and starts talking, hey, you know, Hopper's about to run out of money in 6 months because he's emotionally incapable of dealing with that reality. What's going to happen is within 2 weeks, every fucking investor I'm going to meet is going to know that I'm running out of money in 6 months, right?
And every future employee.
Every future employee I'm going to hire. So either he's going to say, yeah, I'll wait for it to be 2 months, then I'll fuck you over in the terms. Or we'll say, well, you're probably not very good. You're about to run out of money. So one guy freaking out on your board, talking to his buddies within a matter of days can make it impossible for you to fundraise at the one time where you absolutely need to. So you have to be careful how you play that. It's actually very important to understand that. Typically, you know, if I tell Jeff I'm going to run out of money, he's going to go tell everybody how awesome everything is. So that when I actually, and I won't have to tell him that because he's been through this so many times. He's going to be like, yeah, tons of potential. I'm putting more money in. Like, he actually wrote a term sheet that he couldn't fulfill once. He didn't even have the reserve to do it. He's like, here's a $10 million term sheet. We're leading. Because he knew that this was the one freaking time I had to raise, right? So he's like, I don't want
Because VCs are sheeps.
Yeah. Most
of them.
VCs are not cheetahs, yeah.
They're sheeps.
Yeah.
They
But
just follow.
the big institution guys, they don't know how to do that. So they're going to signal all wrong and mess you up. So control is one thing, but the other thing is you always have to be conscious of, like, in the room, what's going to get out and how is that going to screw up all the impossible stuff I still need to get done for us to not die.
Ideally, as a founder of a startup, you don't want to end up with a board that you need to manage. But as you grow, it's really hard to avoid. Like, you don't want to be, and we had that conversation before, you don't want to end up with a board where you have a set of a presentation for your board, and you've got a presentation for that is more intimate for other people, because you want to be able to be totally transparent, talking about the good, the bad, and the uglies. As you grow, it becomes really hard because what Fred just said, some people can just not deal with the ugly. But in a startup, there's, even as you grow, I'm sure Airbnb has board meetings where they're talking about the screw up they did with their product release of the interest and activity stuff, and it's ugly. And I'm not sure how they deal with it, but are they totally honest about it?
They have like 200 people on their cap table. They're not broadcasting that for sure, right? They have to have some mechanism to keep that.
The other thing we did a lot, and you know, I think it was important, is you tag team. And with Jeff, you tag team with your, like, I mean, when we had an issue with a board member, you just, you know, sometimes bad cop, good cop, and you manage it and you try to, you know, make it happen as you want, but you don't have a choice.
I have a last question on the mobile pivot you did with Hopper, because my understanding of Hopper was that a lot of your sales and traffic comes from like the mobile notifications.
90% of our sales is directly
So
tied to
what
it.
is like? Is the notification was behind the
Yeah,
mobile
so
pivot, or
that's
was like
that's
was
an interesting
only-
question. So no, like it should have been, it wasn't. Like when
That
you're
was luck.
Yeah, a lot of it is just it's a weird mix of instinct and luck. So
Yeah.
it comes down, if you can weed out the stuff you shouldn't do, even if you don't know what to do next, there's a good chance that the next step you're going to take is in the right direction, right? So that a lot of that's experience and luck. But what it was is I'm like, you know, okay, like there's no way we're going to be kayaking freaking Google Flights on the web. That's pointless. My customers are suing me, so okay, that won't work. Even if I was able to sell something on mobile, the margin is 0%. So pretty sure that doesn't work. So it's like, that was such a tight box. You're like, okay, so we go mobile only, that's the only place there's any white space. Hopefully we won't die there, right? And so you go there. Then you're like, well, what does that mean to be mobile only? Then we slammed something together in a month, you know, be lean, leave fast. It was terrible.
Well,
And
your first product, you couldn't book anything. You
yeah.
couldn't even.
Couldn't
What
do
was it
anything.
called?
We took,
I don't
well,
remember.
we took the report that was on the Today Show and put it on a phone, and we showed it to users.
Yeah.
They said, "This is stupid. Why is it an app?" And I'm like, "But you loved it on the Today Show."
Yeah, it was like a
So-
report. You could see trends
so
and
the-
stuff, but you couldn't do
so then
anything with it.
That's when I realized that, like, oh, it's totally different, but we don't understand any of it. So then we said, okay, kill everything on the web, nuke everything. Everybody's on mobile, and we're like, I think we need an iOS developer. We didn't have any. It was like, okay, so hire that. So we found one guy. He turned out to be amazing. And then we kind of built that expertise around it. My co-founder coded in 6 days an app that actually became the top 10 travel app in the US accidentally. It's not Hopper. We actually have another app out that he coded
How
in
is it
6
called?
days.
I don't
It's
remember.
called Flight Tonight.
Oh yeah,
And
Flight
we got
Tonight.
sued by Hotel Tonight, of course, very quickly after that.
I remember
So
it was
this is
ugly.
Yossi's, like,
There was a
ridiculous-
guy that looked like James
yeah,
Bond
he has
on
a
it.
master's in cinema, so he took that picture from
James Bond.
No, it's not James Bond. It's the Hitchcock, North by Northwest?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's the poster from North by Northwest, and the guy's escaping a plane that's trying to kill him. He's like, that's the brand. So he puts this thing, he codes this thing to teach himself iOS, and I go, well, let's launch it, right? And it went to like, it was in Oprah magazine. It's one of those things where you realize, oh, there's another.
But it didn't do anything.
All it did is you entered your airport, and it immediately gave you, without you touching your phone, no inputs, no passengers, nothing. It gave you flights that you could take right now. It still,
yeah, I remember,
it still
yeah.
does. You can download it right now. It's called GTFO now because we had to change the name. It still does. It still
What?
does about 1,000
GTFO?
downloads a day.
Like to get this again?
Yeah. Well, so, but then we realized mobile was different, right? The least amount of stuff you put in it, the more users you had. So I'm like, okay. So we kind of get the philosophy of it, which is behind everything we do at Hopper. But I'm like, you need to set up anything. And this is a product thing. When you launch something new and you want it to be truly disruptive, you have to have a thesis that is, how can this fail? Right? Because if you don't have that thesis when you're building a new product, you're going to convince yourself it can work until you run out of money. Right? Twitter was invented because they ran out of money doing that other thing that lasted 2 years. Right? And they're like, we have 30 days left. What can we do? And they invented Twitter, right? And you always have the brilliant, stupid idea at the end when you run out of money. So the way we like to build product is we set up a box in which if X doesn't do Y, it's a failure, we're gonna kill it. All your work's gonna be thrown in the trash, right? So people are like, okay, well, this had better happen, right? There's a motivation aspect to it. So I said, this is very, very simple. In travel, it costs you about $2 to acquire a web visitor. 90% of them are going to drop off. So it's going to cost you $20 to acquire a download. You make about $3 to $4 a booking per user. So you're going to be negative $15 for every user you acquire. I'm going to need you to book 4 times, right? So I was like, retention. I'm like, okay, well, what could make somebody more retained? And we're like, well, I think we're going to need to have push notifications enabled. So I put a bar saying whatever the app does, it has to have 60% of people that download it turn on push notifications, which is an impossible number. The best thing that's not Hopper and Travel gets 10% of people turn push on. And I think the best thing in any category is Messenger. 85% of people turn on push notifications, and Messenger doesn't work without Snapchat, Messenger. They don't work. So, but even then, somehow 15% of people don't turn it on, right? So Hopper has about 80% of people today turning on push, depending on the channel. So I basically had set this bar that we had to do it, but then I needed a reason for you to turn on push notifications. Like, how am I going to convince you to do this? And if I tell you you can save money on shopping on Tuesday, there's nothing, like I just told you the answer. So I'm like, how can we do this? And then our head of data science, Patrick Suri, I've worked with a lot of smart people, like Hopper's almost only smart people to my point of firing everybody else.
Who's the almost? We don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. The dog is pretty dumb. She's nice. But Patrick Suri is, I think, one of 2 or 3 people that I would say are actual geniuses. You actually can't tell when you're talking to him, and he doesn't know.
Most of them you can't, yeah.
Yeah, most people you can tell. He's a completely different version of this. So he comes in on a Monday morning, and he says, I think I have it. I'm like, have what? He says, I think I've cornered the problem that you need. And I'm like, I haven't even asked you to do anything. He's like, yeah, no, but I think I know how to do it. It's just, what are you talking about? He says, I know how to forecast. Like, forecast what? Future airfare. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how, when, which route? He says, like, all of it. I think I can forecast every route, any price, a year in advance. And he gives me some math around it, and I'm like, what, you did this weekend? And he's like, yeah. And so it turns out that the algorithm that has planned 25 million trips and all this stuff, he actually wrote in a weekend. And people come to us and they're like, oh, I want to work in data science, and you guys must spend a ton of time on this algorithm. It's like, you're like, you know what? We don't really work on that thing.
No, I think it's because you've got so much data, though.
Yeah, so part of it was the data, but the math is very, very simple. It's incredibly elegant, and basically no other human being I've ever met could actually have pulled that off, right? So the fact that the foundation had been there for so long, but he actually just leaped it ahead. I'm like, oh, so I was like, can you show me something? He shows me this chart that's like, the price is going to do that, and then he says, well, as I walk through time, it kind of followed. And I'm like, so I could tell somebody, here's what's going to happen in the future, but for me to keep you informed of how that's evolving, you must turn on push notifications. I was like, that's it. That's what we're going to do. And so we shipped this app that basically didn't do anything. You couldn't buy a ticket, but it had a forecast in it, and it said, turn on push notifications for me to tell you how this is going. And when you looked at it, it's like, this app doesn't know the future, so you almost turn it on as a dare, right, on the first time. You're like, yeah, of course not. And then a whole bunch of people one-star us in the App Store. This app doesn't work, it's crap. And we're like, what the fuck? So we actually figured out a way to reach some of these people, and we say, so why did you one-star? So your app doesn't do anything. It's like, how long have you had it installed? A day. When are you traveling? In October. And it's like, it's January, dude. Like, what? He's like, but you didn't send me a push notification. I'm like, you want me to send you a push notification? So we added this push notification, which was contrary to anything you'll ever read on this, even today, which said, don't do anything. It's and 60% of what we sent is this notification that says, don't do anything. Just wait, it's fine. We were honest. And then we realized with that this was a conversation. It was not a transaction. That was like the aha moment that got us over everything else. It was basically, if users are begging us to buzz their phone at 3 a.m. with no useful information, that means we've actually cracked something that's not superficial, because you will not find a single use case. You can read everything about push notification. Everybody talks about relevancy and keeping the frequency low. So we turned the knob from once every 2 months to 4 a week. Then we actually went too far. People freaked out, so we turned it back in. But we figured out where that sweet spot is, and where all of the investment has been is in the conversation, right? Now we have all these other things that we're doing. Today, 50% of the $1 million a day that we sell is something you didn't ask for. We actually believe that in travel, 50 to 75% of all the sales should be something you didn't know you needed. Because what do you know? Like, have you been there? No, of course not. That's why you're going, right? Like, you're an idiot. Like, do what I tell you and it'll be fine, right? We're actually realizing that we can do a better job actually guessing. And you look at what Netflix is doing, for example, like, they're very good at making you watch like retarded Swedish sci-fi, right? That you don't really like, but they're just good at figuring out what you're gonna go for.
How can you figure it out? Is it like the first time? Because all users must the first time look at one.
That's actually an interesting question too. So when we had no users and a lot of air data, we couldn't do anything. But what happened over the first 2 years of the app being out is we actually had 25 million trips planned on it. And so what that is somebody telling you up to a year in advance when they want to travel. But what's interesting is if you look at these 25 million trips, 50% of them 50% either have multiple dates lined up for the same destination. So what they're telling you is, your app is stupid. I don't want to pick dates, so I'm going to load all these stupid watches, and I hate you, but I'm going to do it anyway because I value the push notifications. So they're saying I have a bunch of flex, right? Or they have one date pair, but they've loaded 10 different destinations or 2. So the average number of destinations tracked is 1.4 per user. That's the average. So basically what we've learned is 50% of people don't care where they go or they don't care when they leave, right? So you're like, well, that's an interesting finding. But if you think of what that graph is, if you're watching Montreal to Rome, in October, there's probably 40,000 people that are or have watched the same thing. So if I just flip that graph around and I look at what have the people that are doing exactly the same thing you are, what have they watched simultaneously, what have they searched, what have they clicked on, at some point, which we passed last year, it gets really easy to say, well, Milan is literally half the price, and you don't know anything about Rome, so you should be fine with Milan, right? So it turns out that when we send those notifications, there's a little bit of clickbait because it's worded like, have you considered Milan? And you're like, I have not considered Milan. What do you like? You tap on it, right? So there's a little bit of that. But the conversion, so the open rates are 3 times higher, right? So like, if I send you something like, your price for Rome hasn't changed, wait, well, you're not going to open that, right? But if I send, have you considered Milan? You're like, no, what is Milan, right? So the open rates are 3 times higher, but the conversion rates are the same.
And you use feedback that if they don't.
Yeah, well, we should, but we don't yet. But yeah, that's coming, right? So we have this thing that's like this really sexy name. It's called the recycler. It just watches everything we send, and if you interact with it, we're like, well, who's like him? And we just pummel everybody else with that. So it turns out that combined logic for switching destination, switching dates, switching the origin airport, actually. There's all these people that live equidistant between a big airport and a small one, but the small one has all low-cost carriers coming in, so you can actually get them to switch pretty easily. So just pumping that in just basically converts better aggregate than doing what you asked for. So we basically concluded that our users don't know what they want, right? So then we actually did another experiment after that where we're like, okay, well, what if I don't tell you which airline you're flying? And what if I don't tell you when you're leaving? And I tell you that you're not going to get your ticket until a month before departure, but it's cheaper. Will you go for it? So we tried all these things that have never been tried in the industry, including something where we tell you, I'm going to take all of your money. I will not give you a ticket. But if you change your mind, I'll give you your money back. Until I give you a ticket, at which point the airline's going to fuck you over. So it turns out you are more likely to buy something if I don't ticket you, because the airline fees are so punitive now, as long as I guarantee the price.
Yeah, you guarantees.
Yeah. So think of how contrarian that is, right? So we just keep stepping our way into like, oh, well, all these people are willing to change their airports. Are they willing to give us money for nothing? So we actually coded something that says, steal all your money. It was a hack. We hacked our own system. When you put your credit card in this thing, it would just debit $3,000 from your credit card and give you nothing in exchange. Except
you can serve the market when you like upsell.
Well, it's kind of a hedge fund if you think of it. Then we just went, well, I'll go to the airline and say, he already booked. You want to give me this rate? And they're like, well, will anybody else see it? No. Well, sure. So we ended up having no risk. So we're trying to figure out how to make that part work. So it turns out that if you don't ticket somebody, you're going to convert more. You get all of this learning from the user behavior. That's one of the reasons why when companies scale up, they are able to do things that companies that have not scaled up can't. That's actually why venture capital is strategic.
You can test.
Well,
things.
yeah, the only reason I know all these things is because we're the only company that's sending 250 million push notifications a year. There's no other company on earth that's doing that. And the only reason I'm able to do that is because we raised 100 million, right? Because we're not profitable yet. So at that point, you enter the phase where venture capital is actually a strategic weapon, which is what's supposed to be. At the beginning, it's so you don't die. You're supposed to raise your growth rounds, not so you don't die, but so that instead of becoming profitable at some scale, you can be disruptive at no limit. Uber, losing $1 billion a month is probably the most extreme example seen to date, which I hope there won't be another one.
This is why Hopper, when you look like in Montreal, everybody's talking about AI and so on and so forth. I think it's the best example. I mean, it's artificial intelligence, but it's applied. And I think it's the only AI type companies that will work, because you can only do it if you've got massive amount of data. So the companies that start empty, really hard. I don't know how they'll do it, really.
It's like Google's autocomplete, right?
Yeah.
That's actually 100% based on queries, not on anything that was on the web. They had to reach scale to be able to build that.
Yeah.
Netflix's recommendation engine, they needed millions of users to be able to do that. These are called network effects. It's like Microsoft has always been a shitty software company, but the reason that they got so big is because everybody had them. Why keyboards are so retarded? That's like a network effect. Like nobody could ever change all the keyboards to something that made any sense. You know why the letters are that way, right? It's because those typewriter things used to collide. So you had to make sure that the letters you were typing on were not physically located. That's why it's a mess like that. Otherwise, it would be A, B, C, D, like any child would do, right? So, but too many people know how to type, and there's too many keyboards out there. So those systemic things apply to companies too.
Yeah.
It's why, nobody can take Uber.
But that's why as a startup, you don't have that benefit. So that's why you need to start with somebody else and go to where the puck is gonna be and not to where the puck is,
when the
because
wave
then,
comes,
yeah.
you go up,
Make
right?
that.
Yeah. That's why Wayne Gretzky was right.
I have two questions for each of you. The general one is, what's your perspective on yourself when you were our age, so between 20 and 25 years old? And for Fred, you definitely are a talented person. Why focus on airfares, for example? Not like it's the humanities solving. Like, why not tackle like a global issue, for example? What pushed you towards that? What's your motivation? And for Sophie, I guess it's an obvious question, but important for me. How is it to be a woman in tech, and do you have any advice for us to get more women involved? Because that's a huge mission. Diversity is a huge mission for Federal Ventures.
And you can start.
Well, the way I felt when I was your age, I guess, I think it was very different because for me, it's almost 30 years ago. But I just went with what felt right? I didn't overanalyze, so I ended up, being in tech. I was very curious, actually, when I started, the internet was just starting and people were talking about it, so I just went, I explored, and then I was very intrigued by what was happening in the network and so on. And I ended up being in venture capital a little bit by luck and coincidence, but I think it's because I was curious, adventurous, and entrepreneurial. Like a lot of the people that I studied with, they went with a set plan, like work for a big firm, were worried about their pension fund and their salary. I always took a lot of risk with everything I did. Like I just jump into something new and so on and so forth, which is very risky, and some people obviously totally fail doing that. But I think if you don't take risk, it's really hard to get to a point where you're doing something exciting. In terms of women in tech, most of my career I've been the only woman in what I do. Finance, one side, tech, the other side. I now Eleanor is working with me, and BrightSpark, we're a majority women in the team. And I was lucky enough to work with people, my partner Mark being one, where he's got no bias whatsoever. He just wants to hire the best people. So for him, when we became partners, like he's Jewish, South African, older than me, based in Toronto. I came in when I joined him, I was young, so young, female, French, from Quebec, Catholic background, whatever. Like the fit was like totally opposite, but it didn't matter to him. So I think for him, he never looked at me as I'm a woman, I'm this and that. It just made sense because we had this connection and we worked well together and very complementary. So I think nowadays what I see with your generation is most people I meet are like that. In my days, it was not. So I think most young men I meet don't see a difference if they're dealing with a woman or a man. Like for them, if it's another colleague and it doesn't matter. So I think it's beneficial for the women that are entering tech for sure. I think the part of the challenge though is, as whatever we say, when you're a woman, you deal with issues differently. So you tend to be sometimes more focused on the human issues, more focused on the relationship, and sometimes more emotional or whatever. But when I was young, I just had to learn to deal with it. So I became, I would say, a bit harder, a bit more close to the way I was dealing, which I think is a shame. And I hope young women will not have to do that, because when you only deal with men, you need to censor yourself and you need to be really unemotional about everything you do in business, and it can be really hard for a woman. But I think it's much easier today, and I just think you just need to go through it and go through your career, and there should be no difference. The little caveat I would say is, if you want to have a family and kids, it's a bit harder for a woman because you need to, you get pregnant and you need to sometimes take a maternity leave and everything. But again, there's ways to deal with it, and I think now it's much easier.
We're 50-50 probably, with the one exception of engineering. It's because we just can't find any people, any women that apply. Like, there's just like, we get, and my founder is like hell bent, like co-founder is like, I want to hire a woman, basically we have this in engineering, this insane bias where if we get a female engineering resume, he talks to her. Like 100, and we haven't been able to get one that even comes close to passing. And that's not because they're worse than the guys. It's just we get one for every 6,000 male applicants.
But I think it's going to change in 15
so
years.
I'm hoping,
I think it's the same thing.
I'm hoping that's reversing. But what I've seen in the schools is kind of depressing. And I get it. Like, I mean, I didn't want to be a geek either. Like, pocket protectors and glasses. Like, it kind of sucks. Like when you're a girl and you're like 17, you're like, you don't want to be a nerd. Like that's terrible, right? Like, so I didn't want to be a nerd. My co-founder didn't want to be a nerd either, right? So I get that there's actually like a social bias against it that has nothing to do with the hiring mechanism. But if you remove engineering, we're probably even more women than men. And I'll tell you something, it's important. It completely changes the dynamic in the company. Interestingly, so our head of product's a woman, she's 28. One of the things that offsets just the biological reality is if you hire younger, that actually doesn't really kick in for a while. Typically, it was very different 20 years ago, but most people are having their kids in their mid-30s, late 30s, even early 40s now. So that thing actually gets neutralized from an employer perspective. Anybody who's thinking that is stupid. If you're hiring in a startup where basically you want to hire people that are in their mid-20s or very early 20s, as the case you can, because you're going to be able to give them the right culture, and they'll work stupid hours because what else are they going to do?
And then if they have a baby later, it's going to be fine because it's the cycle of life, and they're just
that's totally okay, right?
Yeah.
So that thing is stupid. It's not actually a factor. But interestingly, so our head of product is a woman, and somebody said, hey, you should come and talk about this one thing about women in tech. She's actually one of the best known product people. She won the Google Award and all that stuff. And most of our team is women, although, I don't think she discriminates. She comes and says, I don't give a fuck if it's a girl or a guy. Like, I don't want to go give this talk. And I'm like, we got our culture right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's what it's like. The one superstar woman should not even be a thing. She should be like.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm invited to so many women in finance, women in tech, and all of that. I don't like it because I think it should be natural, but at the same time, we can't be blind to the fact that it's harder for, like they say, a female-led startup has, I don't know, like 60% less chances or even more, 70 less chances of getting funded.
All the VCs are guys.
All the VCs are guys, and the VCs are the worst machos in the world. You go there and they say, oh, I've just went up the Kilimanjaro with a bag of rocks on my back, and I came down on my bike, and it's like, and what about you? I'm like, no, like I have 3 kids, and I just cook and I work, and they're really, really macho. So I think this will change, but this is a very macho environment. So they want to talk about the training they do, and they drink green smoothies, and not talking about anybody in particular.
No, I don't know who you're talking about. But basically, engineering and the venture capitalists that's where the ratios are broken. Everywhere else except fucking Uber is actually kind of doing okay. In most places I've seen.